Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching using the vSphere Management Assistant. So what is the Management Assistant, or VMA as we call it? Well, it's basically a virtual appliance. It runs SUSE Linux, so you don't have to worry about having a Windows license, and thanks to the agreement between VMware and SUSE, or I guess Novell, you don't have to have a SUSE Linux license either. So it's a free download, free install, nothing to worry about. And it has the virtual CLI and the vSphere SDK for Perl installed. And this allows you to basically be able to execute or run scripts and commands against remote hosts. Therefore, you don't have to SSH into each host and do something. Really handy if you want to do something across hosts. So with the VMA, you can log into it and then connect to this server, do something, connect to that server, do something, without actually logging out and back in, logging out and back in. It just makes it a lot more efficient. Can be done without having to authenticate each time. The idea here is if I'm doing a scripted run of something, or if I'm just checking some settings on hosts or manually applying some changes, I don't have to relog in as root or whatever on each vSphere host. So there are ways that we can do that so you don't have to authenticate each time. And you don't have to install it in the cluster you are managing. You may have it on your notebook. You don't even have to actually run it under vSphere. You could run it under Fusion like I do on a Mac, or Workstation for Windows or whatever, and then connect to other hosts and manage those. You can have a single install in your environment with, say, 5 different VMware clusters and connect to those individually too. So you don't have to have one for each. You can just have a central kind of location for the VMA. Some requirements, it's pretty simple. You have to support 64-bit VMs. There's a single vCPU, 600 meg of RAM, 3 gigs of storage, and a single VNIC with 1 IP address. So, nothing too crazy here. Definitely some of the other VMware appliances are far more resource hungry than this is. Deploys as a normal OVA-based virtual appliance. You'll hear me groan about that a little bit in the lab. The reason I groan about it is it's a single VM. I don't like the vApp-ness of this. So it is a virtual appliance, but it does install as a vApp, and that means a few things, and I'll show you in the lab. And I'll show you how to un-vApp it, as we say, if you'd like, which is a fairly popular option. But other than that, it's just you download the OVA, you install it like you would any other, and you just click a few things, set some network config, and you're off and you'll go. And we'll do that here in the lab in just a few minutes. After installation, you want to go to HTTPS IP address of the VMA and port 5480 for some base configurations. The default login is the VI admin account, and you'll set the password for that as we install the appliance. But really, you may not need to do anything on port 5480, but it is where you do updates. It's where you can change time information. It's where you can set other things like change the network later if you want to. So it's a good idea to get used to it. You can join the VMA to Active Directory if you want. So this way you can use Active Directory authentication to say vCenter or even your vSphere hosts if you add those to AD, and therefore you don't have to use other accounts. And don't let these commands get to you too bad. We're going to do these in the lab here in just a minute. But you basically run sudo. So if you're not familiar with Unix, sudo is a command. It stands for super user do this. Basically, normally when you log into a Unix machine, you don't have super user rights to everything. So you call this command to say, go do something I don't really have privileges myself to do, because I don't want to keep those privileges normally. Therefore, I might make a mistake and wipe out a whole volume. So you say, escalate my privileges and run this command. And the command we run is domain join-CLI, join the AD domain, like in my environment it's nashlab.local, and then a domain admin user, which would just be administrator. And it'll ask you for password and all that. You can also do the -OU for organizational unit if you want to join it in a specific OU. Useful if your ESXi hosts are part of AD, and then there's no need for locally stored passwords in what we call the VMA's credential store. If you don't do this, it'll create 2 kind of accounts on each vSphere host that it uses for communication. So this just lets it use AD. Updating VMA is easy. They hit this on the blueprint, so I'm going to hit it and you'll see it in the lab. But it's done via the admin interface, again, port 5480 on the Update tab. Real simple. You say check for updates, apply updates. Other than that, there's really nothing to it. Be an interesting lab experiment if they have you do that in the exam. I don't know if you have internet access. I guess you don't need to since it's hosted out of VMware. So I guess they could have you update the VMA. Definitely we'll hit that in the lab. Adding target server. So now once you install the VMA, you log into it, it's got to know what servers to talk to. You want to add your vCenter, you want to add your vSphere hosts, etc. So you can do this one of two ways. Really depends on what kind of authentication you're using. So when executing commands using the VMA, you can use AD, which is called AD auth, or use cache credentials. Cache credentials are called FastPass, so FP auth. Or if you really want to, you can manually type them in every time. So every time you want to run an ESX CLI against a remote host, it's going to say what's the user, root, what's password, password. All right, here's your results. Now let's do it again. And that's a little bit cumbersome. So normally we would do one of the two. When using FastPass, two user accounts are created on the host. VI admin with admin privileges and VI user with read-only privileges. So depending on what you need to do. And I'll show you those two accounts when it adds them. So now let's talk about adding an ESXi host or vCenter server using AD. So to do this, you run the vifp command. So it's vifp add server, the name of the server, vcenter.nashlab.local, and then you set the authentication policy, which is --auth policy AD auth, so Active Directory authentication. Then you want to set the username, so you can say --username, and then you can do domain // like administrator. Notice the double backslashes. If you don't do that, it causes a problem. Mainly because this is being done from a Unix or I guess Linux command line, and normally the backslash is in a special character, so we do two of them to escape the escape, I guess. But make sure you do both of those. Adding an ESXi host or vCenter using FastPass. So if you don't want to do it through AD, you do vifp add server, say optimus.nashlab.local, like my vSphere host, and then --auth policy fp auth. And it's going to ask you for the root username and password so it can log in and enable those functions. Then if you want to look at the server list, you can do vifp list servers, and the -- long, it'll list out which authentication policy is used with which server. So troubleshooting the VMA is real simple. I mean, it's a single Linux box. It's very self-contained. There's not a lot you have to do to it. Errors on startup, make sure you meet the minimum requirements. We'll talk about the IP policy and IP pool when we get to the lab. It can fail to start if you don't have one of those, but all in all, I mean, it's a VM. Just look at the error that it gives you and take a look. If you've added a bunch of servers, but the CLI command still prompts you for authentication, maybe you added them, vifp add server, and it's still prompting you, you probably are not running vifp target for the target server, so that you're specifying what the scope is for the command, so make sure you do that. You've added multiple servers, you do not know where you're running them against. So you've added a bunch of servers using vifp add server, but when you run commands and you get stuff back, you're not sure which server it is. Well, this is kind of a no-brainer. When you run vifp target, your prompt is going to change to show the current host. If there's no host in your prompt, you haven't specified a target server, and you need to specify -- server for that command. So if you're going to run multiple commands, use vifp target. If you're just going to run one, you can just specify it for that one command, and that's fine. You want to enable DNS resolution. This may be for an older version of the VMA. The current one doesn't have you do this. You don't have to manually edit the etc or resolve.conf file. It's actually part of the network config. You give it a DNS server. So, I mean, to do AD integration, you have to have DNS. Problems while adding Active Directory target or configuring the VMA itself for AD. I mean, this is like a Windows machine. If you can't add a Windows machine to an AD domain, what's the problem? Well, it's usually one of three things. Either your DNS is configured wrong, so double check your DNS server, make sure it's the proper one. Make sure your domain name is right, obviously. Confirm time sync, because it is Kerberos, so we need to make sure the VMA time is correct, the vCenter time is correct, and the DC's time is correct. All this stuff matters, so make sure they are all within 5 minutes of each other. And then just make sure you're typing the password right. I mean, it happens, but the first two are usually the problem, and then just make sure you type the right password. So to start the lab, we're going to first deploy the VMA appliance. But actually, before we do that, we need to do one thing, and that's because this is being deployed as a VApp. And we need to set up an IP pool to configure some networking information. So if you've never done this before, it's pretty simple. It's kind of an odd, I think, type configuration, but it is what it is. So to do this, you click the data center object in your vCenter. Then here on the right, you'll have IP pools. And I've already got one created because vCenter Operations Manager, it requires one as well. So we'll create another one, and I'll show you the hows and the whys. So at the top, you click Add. The idea here is this is going to pass along network information and configuration information to the vApp. So a couple of things. You configure some things, and then we associate this with one or more port groups. So, first of all, when we attach the VNIC to a port group, what IP subnet is it going to be on? Well, in my lab, it's 200.0/24. And then what is the gateway for that network? It's 200.1. IP pool here is one way that you can assign IP addresses to the vApps and the VMs within the vApp. So there are three ways to assign addresses. There's DHCP, which is just uses a DHCP server, but we still have to enable it here in a second. There's static, where we manually just type an IP in, and that's probably what I recommend you do, especially for the VMA, something that you're going to be accessing via SSH. And then there's what's called the transient pool, which is this right here. The idea is you give this IP pool a range of IP addresses, and when a vApp boots up, it grabs one of those out of the pool and it uses it. And when you shut it down, it returns it to the pool. You know, pretty simple, almost like DHCP scopes. The problem is that I want my VMA to always have the same IP, because when I SSH into it, I don't want to have to figure out what it is. But to show you how to do this, in case maybe you do want to do it, you give it a starting address like .25 in my lab, and then pound and the number of IPs. So if I do 5 and click view here to the right, it'll say here's your 5 IPs based on that notation. So not too hard to do, but I'm going to use static, so I would just disable this. If you do IP version 6, you do the same thing here. If you want to allow vApps that use this IP pool to be able to DHCP addresses, you just check the box. If you don't check the box, they will not be able to DHCP an address. You set your DNS information, such as your domain, your search path if you have other domains to put in there, and then the IP of your DNS server. 201, that's it. If you use a web proxy, you put that here, and then we associate it with a port group. So for me, it would be VM network. Oh, and you also have to give it a name, of course, so vcap demo pool. And you would hit enter, and it would save it. And the idea is that when it, even if it's statically assigned, or if you did transient or you did DHCP, it's going to pull things like the DNS server, the search list, the gateway, all that stuff from the pool. So you can see that I've got that here. I've already got one set up with basically I even have some IPs assigned to it because I've used those. I allow DHCP, I've got my DNS, and I've associated it with the port group. So normally when I deploy this vApp in a second, it'll pull that information up. And I say normally because for some reason this 5.1 version of the VMA is not doing that. Even if I assign it an IP, it's not applying it for some reason, so I have to manually set them. I was going to show you how to do that anyway, and it just lets me do it. So with that, let's go ahead and deploy. So we do this like a normal OVA or OVF, file, deploy OVF. And I've already got it in my path here, but you would just browse and go to the OVF that you downloaded from VMware site. We'll hit next. It's going to tell you it's about 540 meg downloaded. It's going to be 1.5 gig thin, 3 gig thick. That's good enough. License agreement, make sure to read all that. Might be a test later. Next. Give it a name, the default's fine. Give it an inventory location, you know, standard stuff. Pick the cluster. Pick a resource pool if you want one. Pick your data store. And I don't have any disk information. NFS is already thin. And then you want to pick your port group. So we'll drop down and I'll do VM network. Oh. Notice here, this is the warning if you do not have an IP pool assigned to this port group. Like I don't have one on management, so you'll get this warning that says basically you can configure networking. It may or may not work. We'll see. But if I do VM networking, or VM network, I've already got a pool assigned, so it's happy. How do you want to assign the addresses? Fixed, meaning static. Transient, meaning it pulls out of that pool. Or DHCP, meaning DHCP. So we'll just do fixed. Let's see. Actually, let's do DHCP. Since I allow that and I have a DHCP server, I'm more curious to see if that actually works in the lab, since I know fixed is not. Again, for a real production, I would do fixed. I don't want this thing changing IPs. Here's what it's going to do. We'll tell it to power on after deployment, and off it goes. So it'll deploy that. Once it boots up, we'll set the IP information most likely, and then I'll show you how to log into the web interface and just give you an overview how you do updates, simple things like that. Alright, it'll start to boot. This guy right here, bring up the console. And it's going to look a lot like Linux because, as we talked about, it is Linux. It's SUSE Linux. Let this boot, and then it'll probably query us for network information. And it does. So we can hit 0 to show the current. And again, it did not DHCP an IP. I don't know why this thing's doing that, but it gives me a chance to walk you through the process. So to set an IP, we use number 6. And it'll say, do you want to configure an IP6? Nope. IP4? Yes. And do you want to do DHCP? No. I'll just go ahead and assign it. 230. Net mask. Is that correct? Yes. It'll redo the IP for that guy. DNS is 4. If you want a second one, you can, else just hit enter. Host name is VMA. There we go. Default gateway. It's going to say which interface for the default gateway. I only have one, so that's 0. Not 201, just 1. We're good there. And I think that's it, so we'll hit 0. Make sure all that looks happy. 230, 255.1 for gateway, 201 for DNS, that's good. Hit 1 to exit. And then it's going to ask us for a password. Now remember, the normal account we use is VIAdmin. So it's going to tell you here, it's going to ask you for an old password, but if you're prompted for an old password, press enter. Here's another annoying thing about the VMA. It has kind of exceedingly complex password requirements. It wants upper, lower, number, and punctuation. So it can't use my standard password. So I'll do one that's a bit more complex, retype it, and we're good. So it'll finish booting, it'll go to the blue screen and show us what to do next. It's basically going to say, go to the IP address you just gave me on port 5480 to manage anything else about the VM. So we'll go do that. Also, real quick, if you do edit settings on this guy, this was well outside the exam, but just for your information, you can come in here, go to VApp options, and disable this, and this will disable the requirement of that IP pool and all that. I'm not a big fan of this being deployed as a VApp, mainly because it's a single VM. vCenter Operations Manager is 2 VMs, and they have startup order and shutdown order and things that require some VAppness, if you will. This does not. It's kind of annoying that they do this, so you could disable it if you wanted to. And it'll say, hey, there's some other stuff. Do you wish to continue? Normally you'd say yes. I won't bother with that now. So let's log into the web interface, which I've already typed, 5480. It'll say, hey, you've got a self-signed cert. Yeah. Then we'll log in with VIAdmin and the complex password. Pretty simple stuff. You don't do a whole lot in here. You can reboot the appliance. You can shut it down. You can also do that from vCenter. If you want to look at some information on the what we call OVF properties, which are basically the VApp properties, you can look at that there. I never get much out of that. Host name, it hasn't reset the host name yet. A restart will probably fix that. Gives you your build number. If you want to set a time zone, you can. I'll leave it UTC normally. Network, if you want to change your network settings, you can do it here without going back to the text interface. You can set your address, DNS, all that good stuff. You can set your proxy if you need one. Save your changes to the right. And then if you want to do updates, it's really simple. You do check updates, and it'll go out to the internet, see if there's a new install package for the VMA. You don't have to redeploy the OVA. You can just say, oh, look, there is an update available. It'll give you some details. Not a lot of details, but it'll give you details. And then you can say install update. I'm not going to do that. Why, you ask? Because the last time I installed this update the other day, it broke my VMA. So since we're doing a lab, and I'd prefer it to work through the entire lab, I'm not going to apply that. I suggest you wait if you happen to be in your lab and see 5101, build 1062361, and hold off on that guy. But normally you would hit install updates. It'll come up with a screen saying, hey, I'm doing an update. Hang out for a few minutes. It'll download the update, it'll apply it, and it'll say, please reboot me. And then it'll reboot to the new version. Rebooting to the new version did not fix my problem. But for the purposes of this lab, there's nothing that the update did we need to worry about. So that's it for this interface, really. I mean, you don't go in here too often, just when you want to check for an update or if you need to change a network setting. Next, we're just going to SSH in. So 192, 168, 200, 230. Yes, and we will log in as VI admin and my complex password again. And there we are. So a couple of things that we need to do. First, I want to show you how to join Active Directory. Why not? So we do sudo, then we do the CLI join command, which is domain join. I always have to remember this because it's a weird command. I always want to do join domain, but whatever. Join nashlab.local is my domain, and then my user. So I can do nashlab back administrator. And then it's going to give me a warning. This warning is less about Active Directory and more about the sudo command. It's basically saying, look, you can do about anything with this command. Make sure you know what you're doing. I'm feeling pretty confident, so let's continue. It's going to ask for the VI admin password again to make sure you really mean it. Let's see. Nashlab. Oh, because it contains a backslash. Oh, user at domain. Huh. That must be a 5.1 change. We can play by that game if I need to, I guess. Normally, I don't even put the domain because I'm joining my local domain, and that really only, I mean, if I just put administrator instead of nashlab/administrator, it already knows that because I've only got one domain. But I guess if you had trusted domains and you want to use an account not in the domain you're adding it to, it wouldn't know that. So just use it, whatever at your domain password. And it wants my administrator AD password. Okay. So it says your system has been configured to authenticate to Active Directory for the first time. It is recommended that you restart your system to ensure all your apps recognize it. So you can do that. I'm not going to do it because I don't think I need to do it for the rest of this lab. But if this was again production, I would do a sudo space, what is it, reboot, I believe it is. Yeah, sudo reboot. And you could just do that and it would reboot the system. So now we've got it in AD. Let's add some servers, right? So we want to authenticate against some servers and not have to type passwords all the time. So we use vIFP for that. So this allows you to add servers, remove servers, reconfigure servers, rotate passwords, list servers. One thing I want to show you before I get too far ahead. 91, let's log into Optimus. Now, if you know anything at all about Unix, you probably know that user accounts are stored in etc password. Passwords aren't actually stored in etc password. They used to be many years ago, but due to the fact that a lot of apps need to read etc password for usernames, user IDs, group IDs, home directories, they wanted to move passwords out of there because you could grab the encrypted password and try to brute force it. So passwords are actually stored in the shadow file. And what I want to show you is there is no VI user or VI admin account. So let's add a server. vIFP add server. Optimus.nashlab.local, and the authentication policy will be fpauth. You can do other stuff. I can tell it the username, I can tell it the password, I can do all that. Anything else it needs, it would prompt me. By default on a vSphere host, it tries to use root, and it's going to ask me for root password. If you need to use another account, you would specify that with -- username. And now it's added what it needs to manage Optimus. So we go back to Optimus, and we cat the shadow file, and oh looky, we now have a VI admin and a VI user account. Those are the accounts that VMA uses to talk to those servers. Now, what if I had something happen and I was told by security group to change passwords on those servers? Or I needed to rotate them every X number of days. Well, that's what rotate password does. So just to show you, vIFP rotate password. Now, servers Optimus. And you can say never. You can say so many days. You can say all sorts of stuff. But if you want to do it right now, just do -- now. And it'll go out and it'll flip those passwords to something new. Oops. Give it a second. And we're good. And now, if we cat shadow file again, you're going to notice that this line of garbage, which is a hashed password, is different than this line of garbage, which is the newly hashed password. All I'm showing you is it actually did rotate the passwords. So now back, let's add a vCenter using Active Directory. vIFP, add server. Oh, halfway through. If you do a remove server, it does remove the VI admin, the VI user accounts. So it does pull them back off the server if you ever need to do that. Add server, vCenter, -- auth policy, AD auth. It's going to say enter username, Nash Lab Administrator, and it already has my password, so it took that. So if we do VIFP list servers -L, the -L puts this third column here. We see Optimus is using FPAuth, vCenter is using ADAuth. Now let's issue some commands. So one thing we can do is ESXCLI, what is it, --server? I always forget because I never do that. CLI-S, optimus.nashlab.local, network nix list, I think is the command. And it's going to ask me for a username because I have not set a target server. So let's do that. Unknown command. Network. And it asks you every time. You'll see this gets annoying. Network NIC list. And it shows the NIC on Optimus. Now let's do it without typing the password every time. Let's see, we need to do target server. So FP target. No, that's not it. It's here I am forgetting what my commands are. VIFP target. And you set the name -S is Optimus. And you'll notice my prompt should change. See, now we see Optimus. ESXCLI. And it shows some namespace. So see network NIC list. And it shows it. And it did not prompt me for a password. So again, use your target. That way you don't have to do it every time that you want to run a command. So as long as I need to run things on Optimus, that's what I do. You can run all sorts of commands. I mean, really about anything that you want to run. You can do vi config. I don't know. Let's pick something. I already did nix list, so that's going to be kind of boring. vmk nic. It'll go to the server, run the commands, and kick back my VM kernel nix. So you can run all sorts of crazy stuff. You can run ESXtop, but this isn't going to work. Actually, it's not ESXtop. It's RESXtop. It's not going to work on the 5.1 version yet, unless it proves me wrong. Nope. Because they added some certificate checking to 5.1, so you have to do some manual config work for RESXtop. If you're on an older version, 5.0 or something like that, it should work fine. But that's how you run ESXtop remotely. So pretty handy. Again, we talked about the VMware CMD command, so we can do that. Again, the downside to VMware CMD is, and here's a bunch of help on that guy, is you got to send it to the VMX file. So you can do a lot of stuff, get state, start, stop, reset, suspend, blah, 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 but you do have to path it to the actual VMX file. So that's kind of the downside to that. Oh, to back out of this, you do evifp target -C, and that clears it. So it just clears you out from that server. I mean, that's basically it. You can type help and get some information, but there's a lot of stuff, not a whole lot here you want to look at. If you ever forget a command, just do V and tab twice, and it'll do tab completion. So you'll see things like VIFP, VIFP target, and the rest of them are pretty common commands that you would normally run. There's a lot of stuff on here. But I think that's it for the lab. I'll jump back to the slide deck. So let's make sure we covered everything, since I was trying to remember at the end there. Deploy the VMA, check. Perform basic config, check. Show how to add hosts in vCenter, did that. Execute commands against the host, did that. So I think that's it. What I would know for the exam, I'd know how to deploy the VMA. Don't forget an IP pool if you need to create that. Know for sure how to add servers. Definitely know how to use VIFP, know how to use target commands, execute some commands to make sure that they worked. That's the biggie. And if you have to, add it to Active Directory, which is not out of the realm of possibilities because it is an AD environment within that lab. Know how you do that. I mean, you saw it. It's the same way as adding a vSphere host. If you use a different auth type, you just do AD auth, and then you give it the username and password that you'll get in the lab. So nothing too crazy here. I'd like to see more people use the VMA, honestly. I don't see a lot of the customers that I work with use it. I think it's kind of under-discussed by VMware, but it is a pretty useful tool. But that's it for this lab and this lesson. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.